full tone for our conference. Yesterday was a truly enriching start. We began with the inaugural session with the welcome address from Professor Dr. Shubir Dhar, Dean, School of Humanities, International Languages and Social Sciences, and by Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty, Head, Department of English, Sister Nivedita University. The presidential address was delivered by the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Sister Nivedita University, Professor Dr. Shonku Bose. We also had the privilege to hear the inaugural address by Professor Dr. Chandrobha Chakraborty, Director of Center for Studies in Gender, Culture and Media, and Dr. Robin Chakraborty, Editor, Post-Colonial Interventions. We witnessed the ceremonial watering of the plant, listened to a stimulating keynote address by Professor Anindo Shekhar Purokayastho, and the first plenary by Professor Dr. Emma Dawson Varugis. Yesterday's discussion were truly wide-ranging and intellectually stimulating. Apart from the keynote and plenary, we had 6 parallel academic sessions. We heard papers that explored a remarkable diversity of themes, from reflections on indigenous aesthetics and powerful readings of women narratives, to discussions on tribal resistance, multicultural identities, and perspective that was shared by the scholars made the conversations both lively and thought-provoking. And many of those discussions continued even beyond the session rooms. It was wonderful to see participants engaging so enthusiastically with one another's work. As we move into the second day of the conference, we look forward to continuing that same spirit of dialogue and exchange. Today's program also includes 6 academic sessions where scholars will once again share their research across parallel panels. And we also have 3 plenary lectures that promise to bring together many of the ideas and questions that have emerged during the conference. I'm sure the sessions today will be just as engaging and enriching as those we experienced yesterday. I would like to record our thanks to all the speakers, chairs, volunteers, and delegates whose participation made day 1 productive and spirited. With that continuity in mind, we move to the program for day 2. We will begin the second day with the second plenary of this conference, and it is my honor to invite Professor Dr. Shonghomitra Dalal, who is going to deliver this lecture online. Shonghomitra Dalal completed her PhD in post-colonial diasporic literature at Monash University, Melbourne, Australia, and had taught in India and Germany. Her research interests include post-colonial migration and diasporic literatures, with special interest in South and Southeast Asian literatures in English, transnational and transcultural literatures, life writing, and food writing. She is the managing editor of the Journal of Creative Arts, and on the editorial board of Rupkatha Journal on Interdisciplinary Studies in Humanities, and Literary Voice, a peer-reviewed journal of English Studies. This particular session will be chaired by our Dean Sir, Professor Dr. Shubir Dhar, Dean, School of Humanities, International Languages and Social Sciences. Professor Dhar is an internationally renowned scholar who has taught for nearly 35 years in Rabindra Bharati University, having served as director of the university's School of Languages and Culture and the honorary director of the Tagore Gandhi Center. He has also had the distinction of serving for a time as the officiating Vice Chancellor of Rabindra Bharati University on the orders of the Honorable Chancellor and the Higher Education Council of the Government of West Bengal. He is at present serving in Sister Nivedita University in Newtown, Kolkata as the Dean of the Schools of Humanities, International Languages and Social Sciences. and mentor, advisor of the Department of English. Professor Dhar has conducted postdoctoral research in Cambridge University and has made academic presentations in Oxford University, Ohio State University, and ULab Bangladesh. He has participated in academic interactions with faculty in Morris College, USA, Colorado University, and the University of Denver. He has had the distinction of having delivered conference keynote addresses, refresher orientation course, and faculty development program lectures throughout India in at least 14 states, including Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Bihar, Delhi, Jharkhand, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Manipur, Mizoram, Pondicherry, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, etc. He has published 10 books and scores of research papers and is at present co-editor of 2 UGC care-listed journals, including the long-running International Journal of Cultural Studies and Social Sciences. Before we begin our second plenary of this conference, we would like to felicitate our very own dear Dean, sir. Sir, would you please come up on stage? And I would also request Mr. Shornendu Dam, who happened to be the convener of this conference, to please come up on stage and felicitate, sir. And can we have a big round of applause for this? Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all the organizers for inviting me. I'm Shonghamitra Dalal, currently associated with University of Technology Bara in Malaysia. Today, I'm going to talk about, as you can see on the screen probably, the title of my talk today is Who is an Indian Author? Identity, Authenticity and Branding in the New Millennium. As we all know, India is currently not only the most populous country in the world, but India now holds the distinction of having the largest diasporic population in the world too. Over 35.42 million overseas Indians, including 15.85 million non-resident Indians and 19.57 million persons of Indian origin, comprise the largest diaspora globally. According to the United Nations World Migration Report 2024, India is the origin of nearly 18 million international migrants, making it the top source country for migrants on a global scale. People migrating from one place to another in search of work or economic opportunities, or to escape violence or persecution, or even to avoid natural disasters or other environmental factors is not a recent phenomenon. The earliest use of the term diaspora can also be traced back a long time ago, during the 3rd century BCE, in a Greek translation of the Bible, indicating a sense of loss, exile, and suffering. However, since the 1990s, along with the rise of globalization and technological and digital communication revolution, not only the nature of the diasporic movements transforms rapidly, but the essence of the diaspora studies, which initially focused predominantly on homeland-hostland dichotomy, has evolved exponentially in multidisciplinary field. Rogers Brubaker in 2005 proposes the term the diaspora to indicate how the use of the word diaspora has proliferated and the meaning has been stretched in various directions. The field of study has been further complicated with the ceaseless emergence of novel ideas and concepts such as transmigrants, digital diaspora, e-diaspora, deterritorialized diasporas, cultural diaspora, homeless diaspora, flexible citizenship, biracial and multiracial identities, and third culture kid, in its struggle to attempt to identify and characterize the diverse predicaments experienced by the current generation of diasporic individuals, to trace their intricate relationships with their country or countries of origin, residence, and movements, and to recognize how they distinguish themselves and their belongingness in a world which is still obsessed with branding and leveling of identities according to some preconceived, prejudiced, and presumed ethnic markers. Today, I will refer to three selected works published in the recent years by three different authors who are born and brought up in different parts of the world but can trace their roots in Indian origin through diverse routes. Their works articulate not only their unique diasporic predicaments, but also compel us to re-evaluate who we should call an Indian author, what can be identified as authentic Indian diasporic experiences, and how they have been branded and labeled, both as an individual and an author, by their community and society in general, and by the influential publishing industry in particular. Navin Ratnam is an Indo-Mauritian Canadian who was born in Winnipeg, Canada, and spent his childhood in Kelowna, British Columbia, to his Mauritian parents who have their roots in the Indian subcontinent. He currently resides in Toronto and is an author of 4 novels, namely Find You in the Dark, 2018, Your Life is Mine, 2019, A Hero of Our Time, a novel, 2022, and The Grimmer, 2023. A novella titled Health Myth was published in 2022, and a non-fictional memoir essay, Curry, Eating, Reading, and Rest, was published in 2017, and he is also contributed to the collaborative fiction project titled Dead Writers last year in 2025. I will today only focus on his memoir essay, Curry, Eating, Reading, and Rest, 2017. It is a slim volume of 3 interlinked sections of Eating, Reading, and Rest, which wanders through several generic characteristics such as food writing, cultural history, literary criticism, travelogue, and memoir. However, Ratnam's predominant aim in this memoir essay is to challenge the existence of a supposedly authentic Indian curry and also to question the risk-averse publishing industry, which solicits stories steeped in stereotypically authentic and nostalgic experiences from the second or third generation Indian diasporic authors. Curry commences with a rather provocative remark. Ratnam implies that curry does not exist. However, he immediately ascertains that irrespective of his personal consideration of curry's non-existence as a generic dish, he has to admit, without any doubt, that several distinctive and authentic versions of curries do overfill conventional food literature and food industries. He further affirms that the significant impact of curry does not remain confined within the discussion of food itself, but is capable of expanding exponentially to symbolically transform itself into a cultural signifier of brown identity. Ratnam's childhood experiences are simultaneously marked by his small-town white Canadian friends, along with the unique Indo-Mauritian spread at the dinner table at home, and by his passion for thrillers and crime fiction. His first short story, Cinema Rex, was originally published in the literary magazine The Malahat Review. It was loosely based in Mauritius and inspired by the stories he has heard from his parents who grew up in the island. It is a classic coming-of-age story which explores 3 young brown kids transitioning out of boyhood on the island of Mauritius in the early 1950s and their subsequent film-obsessed lives in the West as adults. He admits that the success of this short story garnered him real attention from award juries, publishers, and agents. However, his first novel, Find You in the Dark, which was an instant bestseller and an Arthur Ellis Awards finalist for the best first novel, and the next novel, Your Life is Mine, are psychological thrillers and do not necessarily have brown protagonists operating within a stereotypical pre-existing story template of tragic looking back, generational disconnect, and an inability to reproduce mother's home-cooked dishes. Ratnam recollects that in order to counter the pressure exerted by the cultural identity focused publishing industry, where he is expected to produce manuscripts narrating hackneyed and predictable diasporic experiences by the, I quote here, publishing industry operatives who have an extremely narrow internal definition of diversity, he decides to assume a wide pseudonym, Nathan Ripley, as an author of his psychological thrillers. Such a choice, according to him, best facilitated avoiding the stereotypical expectation of authentic immigrant as identity diasporic writing and also allowed him to, I quote, come to people's desks under a different identity that's not associated with his racial background, unquote. This racial background, which is tinged with the prejudiced expectation of articulating authenticity. Ratnam's memoir essay therefore interrogates the troubled concept of authenticity, be it the taste of an Indian curry or the expected and accepted traits of Indian diasporic identity. As curry can be an infinitely diverse dish in its taste and ingredients, Indian diaspora is also marked by extremely diverse history, cultures, traditions, and cuisines, since they continue to originate from and journey through as varied locations as India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, South Africa, Guyana, Suriname, or Fiji. Hence, my discussion today will focus on unpacking the complex notion of authenticity and eventually argue that the pursuit of a singular idea of authenticity and identity as an Indian is inadequate, since the perception of authenticity significantly within any diasporic predicament is not a static artifact that can be observed and analyzed through an external lens, but a personal truth that can only be produced and reproduced continually through one's own unique diasporic encounters. I also highlight the problematics of essentializing a singular story or a unique cultural signifier, such as curry, to identify certain cultural traits, which necessarily disregard the fluid and evolving nature of culture itself as authentic. Even though the very concept of authenticity has become a widely used catchphrase in different strands of literary, cultural, heritage, and tourism studies, it is still difficult to determine what exactly one signifies by the term itself. According to ancient Greek etymology, the word indicates genuineness in the sense that it has been validated by someone as original. Such meaning also includes the idea of being sincere, natural, credible, and real, which at times can be related to some past and olden days, signifying a perennial longing to trace something back to its source. However, the ancient Greek word also refers to master or ruler, which would be closely associated with the sense of authority and authorization of any texts, exhibits, depictions, or performances. Charles Lindholm in Cultural Authenticity attempts to identify varied modes of authenticity perceived differently within diverse contexts. In legal jargon, authenticity is proved if the signatures on the document are made by the person whose name is on them, while for a collector or a connoisseur, a piece is authentic if its source can be traced. According to Lindholm, a person can be considered authentic, quote, if they are true to their roots or if their lives are a direct and immediate expression of their essence, unquote. Similarly, collective identities are authentic, quote, if their biological heritage can be traced and if the members act in the proper, culturally valued manner, unquote. Lindholm thus characterizes two overlapping ways for an entity to be marked as authentic. It is either through genealogical or historical origin or through identity or correspondence, which Lindholm calls content. He further strives to trace the roots through which an individual continues to pursue their own authentic being and practice a lived experience of authenticity. He again identifies two different ways of seeking such authenticity. He terms the first as seeking personal authenticity, which can be done, quote, through art, musical performance, travel and excitement, consumption and self-exploration or expression, unquote. And the next as seeking collective authenticity, which is a construction of group identity, quote, through food and desire, through food and dance, forms of nationalism and the identities of minorities, unquote. Lindholm rightly points out that these two strands of personal and collective always intertwine and influence each other, which are also evident in the discussion of diverse forms of authenticity. Seminal discourses on authenticity have distinguished concepts such as staged authenticity, existential authenticity, and emergent authenticity. Dean McConnell identifies how staged authenticity is practiced mostly in the performance of heritage tourism, where a manufactured place or experience, which he terms as, unquote, staged back region, unquote, is created to provide the tourists with an appearance or sense of an expected authenticity. Wang Ling extends the discussion by recognizing two different kinds of authenticity, namely objective authenticity and constructivist or symbolic authenticity. While objective authenticity refers to the authenticity of originals, constructivist authenticity implies the authenticity of experiences, which is a result of social construction and not adjudged through objectively measurable qualities. Thus, constructivist authenticity is symbolic, as it is a construction of authenticity formed by long-held perceptions of idea or images that are often stereotypically considered authentic. However, Wang proposes an alternative category of authenticity, which he terms as existential authenticity. Existential authenticity transcends the object-related attributes or the projected and perceived attributes that emerge out of objects. It is instead produced through a unique, quote, potential existential state of being that is to be activated by tourist activities which have nothing to do with the authenticity of the true object, unquote. He even divides existential authenticity into two different dimensions, named intrapersonal and interpersonal authenticity. Intrapersonal authenticity relates to, quote, bodily feelings, both sensual and symbolic. The human body, which is both a display of identity and a primary organ of sensibility, creates an authenticity of being beyond the measure of material experiences. Interpersonal authenticity is achieved by self-making, which is related to constructing a sense of self-identity through a holistic experience developed through accentuating natural, emotional, and familial bonds. Therefore, authenticity can also be regarded as a personal construct shaped by an individual's physical, emotional, and psychological experiences. Such personalized perception of authenticity evokes what Eric Cohen refers to as emergent authenticity. According to Cohen, authenticity in its objective sense is non-existent. He states that, as a socially constructed concept, authenticity is not something given, but negotiable. His idea of emergent authenticity thus lies in the eyes of the beholder, where material products and cultural traits can evolve and become authentic in the course of time, and where sense of authenticity can also differ depending on different perspectives and needs. Such an evolving and emerging kind of authenticity can obviously lead to commoditization, which McConnell previously identifies as staged authenticity, which in its course of preparing and packaging certain material objects or cultural experiences for public consumption disregards the original authentic essence. However, Cohen argues that transformation or commoditization should not be solely seen as having destructive impact. According to him, in the course of acquiring new perceptions and perspectives, the origin and originary essence of objects and cultures do not necessarily disappear, but, quote, new meanings may be added to old ones, which persevere into the new situation, unquote. Food traditions and culinary practices are often considered authentic markers of ethnic identities. Conventional food and foodways not only form an important part of cultural heritage, but also act as a significant attribute of cultural identity and belonging, both on an individual and a collective level, as it exposes the norms and practices of certain people and places. However, migratory movements and formations of diverse diasporic communities in different parts of the world have prompted immigrants to redevelop and reinvent their ethnic cuisines in different ways. Food is one of the intimate cultural practices that the immigrants carry with them in order to reroute their familial roots in foreign lands in hopes of sustaining their ethnic and cultural distinctiveness and passing it on to future generations. However, the proliferation of ethnic cuisines and ethnic restaurants worldwide, proposing to offer authentic culinary experience to local, diasporic, and tourists alike, manifests how cultural authenticity is commoditized, marketed, and eagerly consumed as an exotic other. Charles Lindholm identifies the problematics of establishing connections between, I quote, the invention or recovery of an authentic local cuisine and the development of a national consciousness, unquote. He specifically refers to India, where identification of an authentic national cuisine is impossible, as India is not only extremely diverse, both linguistically and culturally, but it also boasts of a continuation of an oral tradition of local culinary practices, consisting of multiple local styles of cooking and a complete absence of any pan-Indian dish or particular cooking style. It has become further complicated as the country and its different cultural attributes have been regularly impacted and influenced by repeated invasions and colonization efforts. Lindholm refers to the Mughal invasion in India during the 16th century, which developed a unique cuisine that foreigners often recognize as Indian. He cites that such stereotypically perceived North Indian cuisine actually blended the culinary traditions of the Afghan invaders and the peasant food of North India. Similarly, he illustrates how the 200 years of British colonization of India has eventually yielded a truly subcontinental food regime of curry based on their own standardization of recipes. The hackneyed dish of curry is customarily showcased as authentic Indian dish in ethnic Indian restaurants throughout the world. However, as Lizzie Collingham states in Curry, A Tale of Cooks and Conquerors, even though there are regional differences in the cooking styles and ingredients used, the British started to use the term curry as a generic term for any spicy dish with a thick sauce or gravy in every part of India. Such disregard of wide variations in cooking styles, which is achieved by adding various spices in different combinations, proportions, and at different stages in the cooking process, resulting in subtle differences in flavor and taste, brings about, on one hand, a greatly altered and simplified recipe to suit the British and European tastes, and on the other hand, signifies homogeneous stereotyping, which the colonizers used to collectively identify the colonized. Rahit Varman pertinently observes that the coinage of the term curry is a part of British colonial narrative, which is shaped by commercial interest and racial prejudices. He further discerns that since colonization and commercialization have facilitated circulation of goods and ideas on a global scale, curry is eventually assumed to be an internationally known, supposedly authentic cultural icon, signifying, quote, hegemony and global hierarchies that shape ideas of consumptions and markets, unquote. Authenticity is thus authorized, branded, and marketed to gratify the insatiable global hunger for a taste of an exotic India. Graham Hoogan, in his much referenced The Postcolonial Exotic Marketing the Margins, justifiably indicates how the cosmopolitan alterity industry carefully exploits and exoticizes cultural difference and turns it into a globally marketable commodity through offering, I quote, a range of available options for both the producers and consumers of culturally other goods, unquote. Such productions simultaneously incorporate strangeness and familiarity in different degrees, depending on the perspectives of the producers and consumers. Exoticizing certain people, places, or objects is also a conscious manipulation which applies specific, quote, exotic codes of cultural representation, unquote, in order to satiate the, quote, global spectacularization of cultural difference, unquote. Naveen Ratna's memoir, Curry, questions this conscious deliverance of expected tastes of curry and accepted traits of Indian diasporic identity in the name of authenticity. He asserts that such sweeping generalizations promptly dismiss any individual experiences which can be widely varied and multifarious. Through a personal exploration of his own lived experiences, he eventually indicates how performing a single construct of the culturally other not only creates a fallacious idea of collective otherness, but also restrains the many possibilities of expressing diasporic authenticities. Looking back on many diasporic fictions, memoirs, and cookbooks that invariably showcase the archetypal loss of a mother's home cooked meal, Ratnam, in his memoir essay, does provide a recipe of his mother's shrimp curry. It was a much beloved staple dish in his family household during Christmas holidays. According to him, the dish has a deep greenish brown look, which is not a shade that one finds in the curries served in Indian restaurants. He comments, quote, while Westerners may like brown food, they don't like it to be actually brown, unquote. However, he also presents his own version of chicken curry, which he has made his own by deviating from the traditional recipe. He adds sour cream to make it richer and throws in torn up kale leaves into it as the curry nears the end of its simmer. He adds a good amount of black pepper too. Thus, he intends to argue that a dish of curry can be potentially fluid and flexible, as its history of making has also manifested, and each and every version of curry can be an authentic dish to the person concerned, as it exudes a deep personal care and satiates an intimate craving. However, as mentioned earlier, Ratnam's troubled encounters with the cultural identity-focused publishing industry, as it tries to publish his crime fiction and psychological thrillers, also reveal how these constructed stereotypes, contrived by the other, often ironically compel the ethnic diasporic authors into duplicating the same in their creations. This assists their publishers to slot their works into available packages, each marked and marketed with certain levels of ethnic characteristics, representing a fulfilling negotiation of identity, family, and ends, and articulated through a supposedly authentic voice. Yet, Ratnam points out that capitulating to such tacit demands of recreating authentic experiences in diaspora can eventually result in the opposite. They create, quote, false stories with false elements, burying truthful details and experience, built on conventions created by other authors and categorizations of the publishing industry. Unquote. Ratna further explicates how the pressure of exoticizing familiar experiences for commercial purposes exerted by the alterity industry forces an individual from a particular ethnic background to showcase their habitual practices in such a way that they follow the conventional construct of the cultural other. He cites an example. He refers to the Pakistani American author Sonia Kamal and her mango dilemma, as Kamal describes in her personal essay, When My Authentic Is Your Exotic. Prodded by her American editor that you need to rethink food in your novel, Kamal realizes that even though a white American can eat as much pizza as they like, Kamal's fictional Pakistani American family should be eating something else, something authentic. Since the protagonist is visiting Pakistan from America during summer, she needs him to do Pakistani things, catching toads, playing cricket, eating mangoes. Kamal therefore spends 4 months pondering mango or no mango as she recollects. If I put the mango in, was I a sellout? If I took it out, was I being true to the season? What fruit could I substitute? A jamun? But what is the English name for jamun? Should an English name even matter? A jamun being a jamun like a corn dog is a corn dog. Would I yet have to italicize jamun? Who is the audience for my novel anyway? Everyone? But what does everyone mean? Should I stick to an apple or a banana? Or would that be too generic? I put the mango in, I took the mango out. I spent 4 months playing in and out. It was tiresome and annoying. More importantly, I began to ask myself why I should substitute the mango. She finally decides to put the mango in, not because of the fear of the disdainful Eastern eye, and also not because of the fear of needing to fulfill the expectations of the Orientalist Western gaze. For her, mangoes and all the other associated cliches, including monsoons, spices, peacocks, bangles, bindis, sharis, samosas, arranged marriages, and love marriages, are her reality. And it is her choice not to censor herself just because parts of the world have turned my reality into cliche. Consequently, Ratnam indicates that it is necessary to disassociate the idea of authenticity from the clutches of authority and proposes that, I quote, our stories don't have to explain ourselves to white people or to each other, unquote. As part of the Indian diaspora, performing authenticity as a we or a they, and serving a corresponding identifier in the name of curry are the banal chronicling of stories that disregard the story of particularity of regional and familial specificities. Chimamanda Adichie fittingly highlights the adjacent dangers of a single story in one of her TED Talks. She posits the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Ratnam clarifies in an interview why the protagonist of his thriller, Find You in the Dark, which is published under the pseudonym of Nathan Ripley, is white. He clearly states, the protagonist of my thriller is white for a reason. If he was a brown guy with a beard, or if he was black, the book would end with him being arrested on page 10 for his sketchy activities. Unquote. Therefore, ethnic and cultural stereotypes beget further stereotypes, where a single story represents the other as a collective entity. Ratnam, in another conversation with Sharmila Vaidyanathan, underscores, quote, for me, authenticity has to be very personal to the writer. There are no authentic, overarching diaspora narratives. It's impossible for there to be one. Publishers may think there is one, and perhaps the readers do as well. As a result, there is a lot of false authenticity that diasporic writers feel pressure to create, which results in their actual experiences being left off the page. Our chance to look at what is authentically unique to the writer is often taken from us because there is no market categorization for an individual's unique experiences. Unquote. I now refer to another memoir written by Anita Shetty and titled I Belong Here, A Journey Along the Backbone of Britain, which, among others, chronicles how such prejudiced markers of singular stereotype can effectively erase colonial history, history of immigration, and lead to violent race-hate crimes. Anita Shetty was born in Manchester, UK, and is a writer, journalist, and broadcaster. Her memoir won a Books Are My Bag award and was nominated for the Wentworth Prize for UK Nature Writing, Royal Society of Literature, Ondaatje Prize, Great Outdoor Awards, and Portico Prize. She is also the recipient of the RSL Literature Matters Award. Shetty's ancestral Indian heritage can be traced back to the history of the colonial practice of the indentured labor system in the 19th century. Her mother's ancestral family were shipped from British India to British Guyana, and her mother, after gaining a nurse traineeship, migrated to England alone at the age of 21. Shetty's father's family were sent from India to Nairobi, Kenya, when both countries were British colonies, and her father was born in Kenya. Following Kenyan independence from Britain, her father also migrated to the UK at the age of 19. Shetty's parents eventually met in London and married in Manchester, and Shetty was born in Manchester as a result of multiple migrations which are a part of colonial history and thus become part of British history as well. However, Shetty has to confront the recurring query of where she is actually from, right from her childhood, which conceals the stereotypical racial implication that Shetty does not belong in her land of birth. In 2019, as she was traveling from Liverpool to Newcastle on the Transpennine Express train, Shetty became a victim of race hate crime. After asking a fellow passenger who was playing loud music in the train compartment to turn the volume down, she was met with a torrent of racist abuse. Do you have a British passport? Get back on the banana boat. You can read the rest, I don't have to read it out here. As the rest of the compartment remained silent, Shetty, the only non white British person present in the compartment, resolved to make an official report, first to the train staff and then to the police at Darlington and Newcastle, respectively. The accused was arrested, charged, pleaded guilty, and was convicted of a racially aggravated public order offense using threatening, abusive, insulting words and behavior. Even though Shetty is relieved at the successful conclusion of the legal procedure, she continues to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder as she fails to overcome the hideous insinuation that she has no right to belong to a place that she calls home. In her memoir, she also recalls an earlier incident which demonstrates how she has been questioned about her Britishness, explicitly or implicitly many times from a racist in a railway journey to the royalty. She refers to one of her articles published in The Guardian on 20th April 2018, titled Dear Prince Charles, do you think my brown skin makes me un-British? I quote from the news article written by Shetty. I met Prince Charles this week at the Commonwealth People's Forum, at which I was a speaker, on a day whose itinerary was entitled Politics of Hope, Taking on Injustice in the Commonwealth. It was part of the build-up to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the summit of leaders of 53 countries representing more than 2 billion people. I shook the prince's hand with my right hand. In my other, I was holding a copy of my anthology, We Mark Your Memory, writing from the descendants of indenture, in which I have an essay published. I told him that my mother was born in Guyana and that the anthology had collected hidden histories of indenture. And where are you from? Asked the prince. Manchester, UK, I said. Well, you don't look like it, he said and laughed. He was then ushered on to the next person. Although I have experienced such off-the-cuff, supposedly humorous comments before, I was stunned by the gulf. So what does a British person look like? A British person can look like me. A British person can have black or brown, not only white skin, and still be just as British. This should not need to be spelled out in black and white. I have proven that I was born in Manchester and that I am British, as I had my passport in my handbag. I had needed it to get through the venue security. Yet I can't tell Prince Charles exactly where I am from originally, the old chestnut. Why? Because the British destroyed much of the evidence that my ancestors were shipped over from India in the 19th century to toil for the empire as indentured laborers on sugar colonies in the Caribbean. I have been to the National Archives in Georgetown, Guyana, to search for my ancestral history and stared down a gaping hole where records of lives should have been. The British destroyed so much that could properly explain and evidence our identities. She rightly points out that how British history lessons at schools are conspicuously silent on the histories of immigration, the British Empire, the Commonwealth, and colonialism, thus projecting a single story as the only story and unwittingly perpetuating racial prejudice and hegemonic power structures in the society. Barbara Perry's central idea of doing difference identifies hate crimes as reinforcing the hegemonic and hierarchical boundaries of the supposedly dominant and the subordinate groups in society, where violence and intimidation are directed to those who are seen as different, thereby reminding them that they are the other, which implies you are different, you don't belong. However, Shetty's resolve to undertake the journey on foot across the Pennines, a range of uplands in the northern England, known as the backbone of Britain and designated areas of outstanding natural beauty, is not only to assert her right to roam freely in her home country, but also to affirm an unothered existence in Britain. Finally, I refer to an author from my current backyard. V.G. Krishnamurti was born in Ipoh, a city in the state of Perak in northwestern Malaysia, to a Tamil father and a Hokkien Chinese mother. She spent her early childhood years in Kuala Lumpur and then in Madras, as it was then known. She completed her tertiary education in the UK She previously worked as a freelance writer for several magazines and currently lives in Kuala Lumpur. Her debut novel, 912 Batu Road, was published in 2021 and was longlisted for prestigious Dublin Literary Award 2023. The novel juxtaposes two fictional families, the Ayers and the Tans, and explores how their tranquil lives are shattered by the Japanese invasion of Malaya against the modern day secret affair between their descendants. Flitting between 1940s Malaya and 2008 Malaysia, the protagonist Gita turns to the 1920s to navigate the late 2000s in the form of the letters of her grandfather Rangaswamy Ayar, whose father hails from a village in Tanjore, now Tanjavur. As the third generation navigates war, love, and relationships, the secret affair challenges traditional Brahmin beliefs and threatens to destroy an age old friendship. Now, Krishnamurti recollects in an interview, and she said, although I am of mixed parentage, my upbringing was entirely Indian. I speak Tamil fluently and learned Bharatanatyam at a young age and was sent along with my sister to boarding school in the then Madras. We grew up in an extended, very close-knit and noisy family of uncles, aunts, and cousins. Sunday lunches were very much a part of my young and adult life, and that of my two children too, as were the siestas that followed. However, when urged by her husband to turn one of her special birthday gifts of a chapter of a story to him into a book, Krishnamurti decides to produce a story of three generations. She recollects, and I quote, the first thing I told him I needed to do was to give it a past. And that past would have to be a story of a Tamil Brahmin man who migrated to Malaya in the 20s, which would have been the kind of journey my grandfather might have made back then. Unquote. She admits that having never met her grandfather, he died before her father was even married. Of course, she can't possibly know what his journey was like, but she was determined to include it anyway. She explains, I quote, I just felt that while so much have been written about Indians moving to America and the West, there's hardly been anything about them coming to Southeast Asia or this part of the world. I thought that would make for an interesting angle. Incidentally, the Tamil Brahmin community here is very small. There are 300 families only in the country. Unquote. The title, 912 Batu Road, which is now known as Jalan Tuanku Abdul Rahman in Kuala Lumpur, was the address of the house Krishnamurti's father was born in. According to her aunt, the house was given to Krishnamurti's grandfather by the British during his service as an assistant labour commissioner for the British government then. Although the novel 912 Batu Road traces the story of immigrant families in Malaya and later in Malaysia, Krishnamurti includes real historical figures, the Malayan wartime heroes such as Sibyl Katigasu and Gurjan Singh. Sibyl Katigasu was a nurse, and her husband, Dr. Abdon Clement Katigasu, who was earlier known before his conversion to Catholicism as Dr. Arumugam K. Pillai, had a clinic on 74 Main Street, Papang, Perak. During the Japanese occupation, they kept hidden a shortwave radio, nicknamed Josephine, to listen to BBC broadcasts and discreetly provided medical supplies, treatment, and information to those fighting against the Japanese occupation, including the communist guerrillas. In 1943, their activities were discovered, leading to their arrest and torture. Sibyl Katigasu remained resolute and was sentenced to a lifetime imprisonment under the Japanese military code. In recognition of her bravery, she was awarded the George Medal for Gallantry in 1947 by King George VI. Our road Jalan Sibyl Katigasu in Fairpark, Ipoh was named after her after independence to commemorate her bravery. Gurjan Singh, who worked in Malayan police force, founded a resistance group against the Japanese initially with his brothers and friends, risking torture and death if captured, and they carried their campaign under the code name Singha, meaning lion, eventually receiving an award for bravery from the British government. Krishnamurti.
Sorry to interrupt you for a fascinating
Yes.
lecture, but we need to wrap up in another 5 minutes or so.
Okay, sure. This is the last part. Okay, thank you. Krishnamurti observes, I quote, young Malaysians must know of the contribution of these unsung heroes as they are invisible in our history books today. It was important to shine a spotlight on them and acknowledge not just their contribution, but patriotism and love for their country. Unquote. However, even though the National Library of Malaysia, the nominating library for the Dublin Literary Award, commented on Krishnamurti's novel in the following way, this novel was chosen for its interesting history and patriotism of Malaysia and Malaysians. It displays how Malaysia is a harmonious country that embraces multiracial aspects. 912 Batu Road will never be considered for any national award, recognition, or support in Malaysia. Malaysian society is ethnically diverse, comprising Malays and indigenous groups 17.5%, Chinese 22.2%, and Indians 6.5%, and Eurasian and other groups 0.8%. However, despite the formation of the Federation of Malaysia and the achievement of independence from the British, inter-ethnic hostilities and tensions continued to escalate until the tragic day of May 13, 1969, when race riots broke out in Kuala Lumpur, leading to the radical reshaping of Malaysia's socio-political landscape, consolidating and safeguarding the special position and rights of the native Malays. Chia Boon Keng observes, and I quote, as far as most of the Malay intellectuals were concerned, the issues of national culture, national literature, and national history had all to be decided on the basis of Malay society as the base society, while the other races were viewed as immigrant or splinters from their own ethnic society. Unquote. The 1967 National Language Bill mandated Malay or Bahasa Melayu, now renamed as Bahasa Malaysia, as the national language and the sole official language of the nation. The 1971 National Culture Policy conferred national status only upon indigenous cultural productions, including Malay literature. Therefore, only the literature written in Malay is considered national literature, and literature written in other languages such as English, Chinese, or Tamil as downgraded as sectional literature, not worthy of any national recognition, even though they continue to garner international reputation. Hussein Sulaiman sums up this demoralizing circumstance of the non-Malay language writers in the following manner. I quote, the fact that English does not officially exist means that if you write in English, you don't officially exist. Unquote. The Malaysian V.J. Krishnamurti's Indian and Chinese roots, her internationally recognized chronicle of 3 generations of Tamil diaspora in Malaysia, her celebration of human resilience in one of the most difficult periods of Malaysian history have eventually been reduced into a single story of her being a non-Malay in Malaysia, whose authorship will never be nationally recognized. Yet she continues to persevere to preserve Malaysian history through her writings, as she observes, and quote, in the course of the research, you come across those stories of ordinary Malayans of different ethnicities doing extraordinary things in times of hardship. It was important to shine a spotlight on that. If you don't write those stories, it's lost, it's gone, it's over, nobody will remember, unquote. Therefore, it is again time to ponder who can be called an authentic Indian author and what can be identified as authentic Indian diasporic experiences. As referred to 3 different ethnic Indian authors' diasporic predicaments, I contend that an ideal identifier of individual authenticity indulges not in one, but in many different histories and stories, tastes and dishes, initiating dynamic conversation with each other. Identity and authenticity are embodiments of personal history, which creates distinct personal truths for each individual. Personal truths might revolve and evolve through same issues and experiences, but since they are filtered through one's own understanding and interpretation, the truth as one person perceives it might not be the same to another one. Hence, as there are many truths to the same story and many versions of the same story, Indian diasporic identity and authenticity in the new millennium refuse to accept any preconceived labels or markers, but move within and beyond tradition and history as a ceaseless emergence in its promising varieties. Thank you.
Yes, wonderful.
Y-
Uh, Thank you very much for a very, very interesting presentation. You see, at one time, people used to say the way into a man's heart is through his stomach. I think
Yes.
your paper really showed that the one way into literature is once again through food. And I personally found it very stimulating, very interesting, particularly because of the range that you have covered. Uh, Ethnicity, the notions of diaspora, and so and so. That's just one point which is, a niggling point which I like to raise, and that is, you see, you are right when you're talking about the author, the publisher, and you essentially have a kind of a global north perspective, don't you?
Yeah.
In that case, you see, I think that one has to perhaps look at the more indigenous forms of fiction that are being written the world over. If you think
Yeah.
of a country like India, for example, we do have a
Mm-hmm.
large author readership of English language productions. But then there's an enormous market which is very vigorous and very, very creative of regional language writing.
Of
And you see,
course.
it strikes me that as an Indian, if I go to some place as a visitor, as a tourist, I would expect maybe to have something food which is going to be so-called authentic to that particular place. And once again, you see, that's one observation. The other is, you see, nowadays on Indian TV, we watch these travel shows and things in which you see there are foreign chefs who prepare Indian food, and the usual reactions, they eat something hot and they sort of run around in circles. Now, you see, which is amusing to us as Indians. So, you see, once again, the whole manufacturing of ethnicity, uh, two questions: by whom and for whom? Now, your reactions on these?
Well, it is always very difficult to say by whom and for whom because there is no one answer to that. Yeah. So what as you rightly said, that because I was since I am staying outside India, I come across those kind of comments about my home country and my experiences, which is kind of sometimes very weird, and so that actually led me to questions the stereotypes that people have outside India, which I have never thought when I was living in India. So I think this is all because most of the thing, the mostly what strikes me is that it is the commoditization because things needs to be sold. And here, like Malaysia is not so-called West. Yeah, I'm here in Malaysia for about 10 years. And here, Malaysia has a very different kind of attitude towards Indians, which is very different from the attitude towards Indian in the West. Here, Indian food is very South Indian food, and also Indian films and not Bollywood films is all like Rajnikant and the Tamil Nadu based Indians because of the indentured laborers that came here from the Tamil Nadu and Kerala during the British colonization period. And so I think still they are not they like different parts of the world, they showcase Indian culture and whatever Indianness that they have it to sell to others. For Malaysia, they sell it to others to show how multicultural we are, although they are extremely marginalized because they are not even considered as nationals.
Right.
Like even though they hold Malaysian passport, but they, like as I said, VJ Krishnamurti's or any other indigenous like other ethnic writers, their writings were never considered as national literature.
Right. Thank you. We have about 5 minutes for questions, answers, reactions from the audience. So if there's anyone who has a point to make. You can take this microphone maybe. Yeah, this one.
audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this excellent presentation. I just have one query that since you mentioned Anita Shetty and the diasporic condition, one question that reminds me of the latest scenario in 2024, protest in Kenya. That is hashtag reject the finance bill scenario. And there, the African, the Kenyan Asians, they are standing side by side the Kenyan people, the original Kenyan people. And the slogan was, "We are not Asians in Kenya, we are Kenyans." So I would like to ask you that, do you really consider that after the 1963 Idi Amin rule and the 1982 or 83 coup trauma, even today, 2024, the situatedness of the Indian diaspora in Africa, in Kenya and Uganda, is it really integrative that are they really going to get considered as the African nationals?
Well, if they were considered African nationals, then probably they don't have to protest saying that we are Africans,
Yes,
we are
so that is
Kenyans.
still
Right.
a kind of an indentured laborers that they had been, but generations after generations they have been living there. They are serving their
Exactly.
countries. They are being a part
Exactly.
of Kenya itself, but they still are not getting acknowledged as a part
That
of
is
Kenya.
what, yeah, that is what Anita Shetty was trying to do. She was born a British, yeah, but she was never been considered as a British. She is trying to establish that I belong here. That's what Vijay Krishnamurti was also like. Her grandfather came, and we have huge like here like the I can see like fourth generation, fifth generation, sixth generation Indians, they are still not given the equal opportunities as the Malays.
So is it
And that
some kind of a difference that they are considering regarding the privileged position of the Indians in Africa? That is, they are opportunistic and privileged, and that is the reason that they are still getting marginalized and outcast, so-called.
well, it is like different situation, like Kenya situation or different other places situations are different. Socio-political context is different. So I don't think it is right to generalize. What is true in Kenya may not be true in outside Kenya. So I think we should consider, like when we talk about those kind of complexities, we should take that socio-political context into consideration. Because that is very important, because like how the diasporas are whether blending or being marginalized or having a advantageous position, it depends on that particular context socio-political scenario.
Thank you, ma'am. I got my answer. Thank
No
you.
worries. You're welcome.
We have time for just one more question. If there's any observations from the audience? Anything you would like to be clarified? Yes, please.
First of all, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for that, Professor Dalal. I just wanted to know your views on there are these cross currents, especially in the 20th and 21st century. Because of globalization, there's an increased focus also on people traversing boundaries. The boundary is not really mattering anymore. And the idea of the borders is also, it's pretty fluid now because of digitalization and because of all other manners of all other, trends which have come in because of globalization. That starts with colonialization, of course. But there's also an increased pressure on essentializing authenticity. And I absolutely found fascinating something that you said, disassociating authenticity with authority. What are your thoughts on these kinds of cross currents? Because you've talked a lot about how authenticity itself is a construct, which is, I think, something that we find in Western philosophers as well, who are countering this kind of an enlightenment focus on what is authentic, what is not. But there's also very recent kind of work which is talking about how these kinds of cross currents in themselves, there's an aporia in the theory itself, wherein on one hand there's a discussion about globalization, which seeks to negate borders itself. But then there's also increased focus on authenticity and essential identities, which leads to these kinds of racist attacks, and they're increasing everywhere. And we're just talking about the literary representation of that, but in the political state, and the earlier question was also about that. So how do you come across this kind of aporia also, especially vis-a-vis the globalization and the negation of borders in these works? Because I've not read these works, and I find them all very fascinating in the way you've connected them.
We are always saying negating borders. It is like fluidity, crossing borders. This is true. We are doing that. Yeah. With the rise of like traveling and also globalization, whatever we're talking about is all true. But the thing is that even though we are talking about crossing borders, fluid borders, borders are really not fluid. Yeah. It is if we are considering about socio-political scenarios. There are, as you can see, if you follow the recent news, it is really very getting further and further complexity, further and further complex. But I think like we need to talk about it because of this, like the fluidity and also different kind of distinction between we and they, particularly depending on certain physical or cultural ethnic markers, which are like creating those kind of questions and issues needs to be talked about, because authenticity and identity nowadays, I think, as these authors are trying to say, should not be boxed like ticking boxes. The authenticity can also be cross-cultural, can be cross-border, can be negotiable, and can also change according to the where they are, how they are, and how they are responding, and how they want to situate themselves as well. Although that creates a lot of issues, and that's why I think those kind of writings needs to be done to show or to raise pertinent questions that these people are facing on a daily basis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal.
Thank you.
We are badly out of time, unfortunately.
No worries.
But may I say, your presentation was a fascinating one,
Thank
and
you so much.
intellectually stimulating. And not only that, you see, the slides that you showed, particularly with with the illustrations of the food, that was perfectly yummy. So thank you so much.
So hope you are going to have a good lunch.
We're going to have lunch a little later. So that was an appetizer, let's say.
Thank you very much to every one of you for inviting.
You're most
And I hope
welcome.
you have a wonderful afternoon.
We were enriched by your presentation, and we look forward in this university to have you back, if you can give us the time in some future occasion or occasions. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Goodbye,
Bye.
and please keep well. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Dalal, for that lucid and thought-provoking lecture. Observations will inform many of the conversations we carry into the parallel sessions, surely. Now, we'll proceed to the third plenary address. The lecture will be delivered by Professor Dr. Siddhartha Biswas. Professor Biswas is currently a professor in the Department of English, University of Calcutta, India. He taught in the Department of English, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College for 17 years before joining the university. He has published several articles in reputed journals in India and abroad. His books include Theatre Theory and Performance, and Looking for Home, Journey and Boundary in Postmodern Texts, among others. He has also translated several works, among which are his translations of The Merchant of Venice and Twelfth Night. His areas of interest include postmodern theatre, translation studies, and popular culture. The session will be chaired by Professor Dr. Shipra Mukherjee. She is a professor at the Department of English, West Bengal State University. Her research interests are religion, caste, and literature. She has published research with Brill Books, Oxford University Press, Sage Sahitya Academy, Stri Shammo, Routledge, and Permanent Black. Some of her books are Modern English Literature, Under My Dark Skin, Dalit Writings from Bengal, I Belong to Nowhere, Kollani Thakur Charal's poem, The Languages of Religion, Politics of the Sacred, Interrogating My Chondal Life, a translation of Bapari's book, and The Calcutta Mosaic, Minority Communities of Calcutta. She has won the A.K. Ramanujan Translation Award with Mrinmoy Pramanik, the 2018 Hindu Award for Nonfiction, and been shortlisted for PEN Presents UK. Before we move on to the third plenary of this conference, the Indian Writing in English in the 21st Century, Negotiation, Resistance, and Alternatives, we would like to felicitate both of our resource persons. I would like to call Professor Bishas on stage, and to felicitate him, I would like to call Ms. Oindrila Mukherjee, Assistant Registrar and HR, Sister Nivedita University. Ma'am, please come on stage and felicitate. Sir. Ma'am happened to be a student of Professor Bishas. Can we have a big round of applause for this?
I'm absolutely honored because Sir's here today. So whatever I've learned, my colleagues will know. I have learned from the sessions Sir has taught for, Pinter. He's taught us Pinter and the power politics there. So if you see me applying any of it, you know where it came from. Thank you.
Now, we'd like to felicitate our chair for this session, Professor Dr. Shipra Mukherjee. I would like to call upon stage Dr. Monikinkini Basu, Assistant Dean, School of Humanities, International Languages and Social Sciences. Ma'am, if you can kindly come up on stage and felicitate Professor Mukherjee.
It's my pleasure to chair today's session. Dr. Professor Siddhartha Bishas has already been introduced, so we look forward now to his presentation.
Thank you, Shipradi. Let me begin by thanking all the organizers, this university, And I feel very much at home here because I have been here for quite a few occasions, and it's always pleasant to come back. Although, having said that, with Professor Dhor present, it's a matter of great nervousness for me because, as you know, we all look up to him, and he has been such an influence on all of us. I can't say inspiration, you know why, but it's a huge, he has made such an impact on several generations of students and scholars. So speaking in front of him, even now with all my hairs gone gray, it's still a matter of some, as I said, nervousness. And my colleagues and friends and everyone from this State University, Shipradi is here. And once again, I am slightly apprehensive speaking in front of Shipradi. Sneha is a Chandrabha, and I go way back. Shomuk is a good friend. And of course, Obin is somewhere, post-colonial interventions, and I also go back a long time because I have been doing some work for them for a while, and they are doing such great work. So congratulations on this seminar. And every year, SNU holds these seminars which are absolutely brilliant. So congratulations on that too. Now, today, when Obin told me that, Siddhartha, you have to speak, we are organizing this, I was in a little bit of a problem, I would say, because this is not quite my area of expertise at all. I am out of my depth, so to say, completely. But then what I thought that I do have some questions to ask about whatever the state of Indian literature in English is about. So why not ask those questions here so that people can think about them, they can enlighten me. So this will not be something that I am telling you, this would be me sharing my questions with you in the next few minutes. I don't plan to take long. And the other thing that I must apologize for, I will speak not as somebody who knows anything about anything. Then again, I will not be speaking as a layman, a sort of a quote-unquote common reader, but somewhere in between from that particularly confused state of being, and that confusion will show in whatever I am going to speak about. And the title that I had given, I started working on that, but somewhere in between it went in a very different direction. So my apologies for that too. It all began when I was reading Adiga. I am a little behind in my reading, so I read Adiga quite recently. And this is the part which actually began this whole series of questions. Let me quote from Adiga. He writes, I am talking of a place in India, at least a third of the country, a fertile place, full of rice fields and wheat fields and ponds in the middle of those fields, choked with lotuses and water lilies, and water buffaloes wading through the ponds and chewing on the lotuses and lilies. Those who live in this place call it the darkness. So this is the darkness that began this chain of thought as I intend to present to you. And with your permission, I'm going to read today because, as I told you, I'm very confused about this. So reading would be the best way to go. Now, we know that the White Tiger was awarded the Man Booker Prize in 2008. And in Adiga's book, it is being spoken, the whole thing, writing a letter to the Chinese premier. It is by a native of that place, which is called darkness. So somebody who is from that darkness calling it a darkness. And this kind of, I don't know how to bracket it, how to present it, whether it's self-awareness or is it a kind of othering that is happening, othering which is being done by the native of that place himself. So, and of course, we have this othering everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I can remember Arundhati Rai's that piece, Khwabga, in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, where the Hijra community, they're looking at the world and calling it dunya. So that kind of a thing, this otherness is there, and it started this process of thought which kind of told me that this is the kind of otherness that we find in most of the major texts that we call Indian writing in English. So this otherness and this locationing, sometimes like in Adiga is speaking as an insider. Then we have texts in which the perspective is of an outsider. Then we have texts in which there is an interaction between the insider and the outsider. I mean, Hungry Tide, for instance. Pia comes from the outside, and there are multiple other voices from the inside, different layers of voices, from somebody from Sundarban, somebody who is a minor academic sort of a fellow. So we have all those voices, but defining this darkness seems to have become a confirmed part in the location of a section of Indian literature in English, a location validated by the present politics of canon formation. Because if you're not writing about that, you are not really celebrated. That kind of a feeling is very much there all around. And regarding the other colonial, I mean, this is just another thing. I mean, it is Indian literature in English that we are celebrating, that is very much there. There is not really an Indian literature in French that we talk about. I mean, there are people, Torudot, I think, wrote in French, and Madhavane was writing in French. Or even the French influence, I don't really see people talk about Kamal Kumar Mojumdar anymore as such. But, or Portuguese influences. But then again, there was this Konkani resurgence of Konkani consciousness that happened. But when we are talking about English, English seems to have survived all other Indian consciousnesses. In fact, English seems to have been integrated in the Indian consciousness somehow because of its very large presence, numerically large presence, I guess. And in this realm of consciousness, the creative process that allows finding the self in English is at one end of the spectrum. But what I was thinking of is the range of reception of these texts. So I think this is something that is worth looking into. If we separate literature from academia and attempt to look at it through a popular lens, the location of this Indian literature in English might shift a little, or it might shift a lot. Because our problem is we think we are everybody as academics. There is a very large part of India who are not responding to this Indian literature in English as we would like to think. In fact, having said that, there is a large part of our students who don't really care about this Indian literature in English. I mean, there are some names, yes, Amitabh Ghosh, they will flock for autographs, etc. If Jhumpa Lahiri is there, if Arundhati Rai is there, do any of them live in India? So these are questions. I mean, as Professor Dalal was saying, this idea of authenticity and this idea of identity, these are questions that we need to ask because this Indian writing in English has evolved into something else now. We are no longer in the realm of R.K. Narayan, right? We are not there. We are in a very different geopolitical politics. So this is the question that I was wanting to ask, and the problem here is the perception. And once again, from a strictly popular point of view, not an academic point of view, because I am not a part of this point of view as far as academia is concerned. So has this literature managed to get a kind of unequivocal acceptance in India? We like to think so. In classes, we teach them as if they are the be-all and end-all of everything. But what is that location from the popular perspective? And if it is not popular, why is it not popular? So whenever we speak of Indian literature in English, a kind of implied readership seems to be evoked. This implied readership, this is Wolfgang Iser who had first talked about implied readership. And if we are talking about reception, I cannot not refer to Holub's reception theory. And he is writing both as a textual condition and a process of meaning production. This is, the implied reader is becoming a part of this meaning production. But quite interestingly, when we speak about the implied reader, we are speaking of exclusion as well. Because if we are implying a section of readers, then there is a large section of readership which we are excluding, who are not included in this creation of the text itself. So they are not writing for everyone. So this is the thing, and this is where the exclusive nature of this kind of construction becomes apparent. I mean, English is available to a very large part of the demographic now. Is Indian literature in English equally received by all those who have English? So this is the other question. Just because I can speak English or I can read English, am I reading Indian literature in English that much? Or am I choosing to read either vernacular literature or other English literatures? So it is time that we ask these questions. Now, if we take a moment to look at English in India, we will find, of course, many issues. Although Indian English literature predates any idea of globalization by a very long time, somewhere along the line, post-globalization, English had taken on the identity of being a commodity with a slightly evolved purpose. The pressures of the present makes the populace forget the past rather easily and conveniently. And in India, we are not that history conscious. You might not agree with me, but this is what I generally feel. And the past we forget rather easily and conveniently. From being the language of the erstwhile masters, it became the conduit of globalization somehow. Not somehow, we know how. So, representing the West and modern Western enlightenment. So this shift, it's no longer the language of the colonial masters, but it is now the language of the West, the representative language of the West. And Amartya Sen writes, it's in his book called Identity and Violence, The Illusion of Destiny. He writes, I quote, "Indeed, globalization is sometimes seen as a correlative of Western dominance, indeed a continuation of Western imperialism." So this dominance, this imperialism, and this language, they somehow become one, probably, I am guessing, this is a hypothesis that I am presenting. So when we speak of contemporary literature in English from India, and once again, contemporary literature in English from India, I am not talking about the literature from other countries. They have their own diasporic dynamics, etc. So when we are talking about that, quite often the perception of the general population towards it is influenced by this particular aura. Even though there has been discourses presenting the difference between English with a capital E and English S, that we know. A lot of discourses, David Crystal and everything, a lot of discussions on that. And of course, the Empire Writes Back is Ashcroft and the others are talking about that. This remains a question, but somehow the major texts that we have from this kind of Indian writing in English, they seem to be at least attempting to be the central capital E English adjacent. They are no longer trying to be Indian in their English. That English is more global. That English is more towards, once again, English with a capital E. They are no longer happy with being Indian English. This is a feeling that I have. And this, however, to a largely unacademic post-colonial audience, the possibility of such distinctions may not be quite lucidly apparent. That is also true. Which is the proper English, the Queen's English, or American English, or our English, the English that I am speaking now. The average Indian person with one kind of English may not be able to distinguish between this. I mean, no disrespect to the average Indian, but what I mean is that to them, all these Englishes might be the same and might be a representative of globalization, a representative of the West. So, there is to many native readers a dissatisfaction with the Englishness of this kind of English literature. Of course, when I write Englishness, I mean predominantly a Western sensibility that looks warily, at least, if not that looks down upon certain Indian traits, certain Indian cultural ideas. There is selective acceptance of the features of Indianness. Well, of course, according to the project at hand. Unlike the novels of R.K. Narayan, in which society was, as Ashcroft is saying, I quote Ashcroft here, no longer conceived as other, but triumphantly self-defining and self-sustaining, able to reorder the conceptual frame within which power is determined. And there is this sense of harmony that we have. There is a project of nationalization, nationalism, etc., just after post-independence. But now this sense of harmony that was there in this new nationhood idea, that shifted as Indianness progressed. So this Indianness idea, and that shifted much with liberalization as well. So we cannot forget that very central idea which changed Indian history remarkably. So that, and certain texts became celebrated for their discovery of the other. So whereas towards the beginning, this otherness was challenged, now this otherness becomes everything. This otherness is becoming celebrated. And some attributes find direct condemnation, some are accepted as charming or even progressive. Critique of a culture is bound to be such. There is no, of course, some would be selected, some would not be. But the point is whether there is this imposition of the Western paradigm via this imposition of a rather capital E English aesthetic sensibility and that Western cultural attempt at domination. So this is a question, this question of imposition of Western paradigms that is not organic at all. Now there is this claim that, of course, we say that whatever is Western was actually ours. That is a claim there. But the West has properly appropriated them, they have taken them, they have developed them, and they have marketed them. So there is no point saying that whatever you are saying we had said earlier. There is absolutely no point, that there is no rationale in that. So this perhaps brings into the question the Indian selfhood found in these texts and questions the globalized representations of an enlightened India which condemns the non-enlightened as defined by a rather Western paradigm. So this demarcation of this definition of enlightenment, whether it's how is it presented, how is it presented globally? So that is the question that I am trying to ask. So the fact that, English literature, if you think about Chetan Bhagat, if you think about Amish, they are widely popular. But are the major names that we think about, like Amitabh Ghosh or Arundhati Rai or Jhumpa Lahiri, are they as popular? This question of popularity has to be asked, right? So the nationwide success stories of Chetan Bhagat and Amish Tripathi, this is something that needs to be examined because they are also writing in English. They are also writing in a kind of a discourse which seems to be far more acceptable to majority of India. Right, so this is something question. And of course, the term nationwide has its own problems. Arundhati Rai, in her An Ordinary Person's Guide to Empire, says that even after independence, the state and the people in India could not become one. referring to the Hindi word public. I mean the Hindi word, not the English word. So public, she says that it has become irretrievably separated from the concept of sarkar. So public and sarkar are two different phases now. It is only the elite that can think that it is one with the state. As a conscious project, English has remained the marker of elitism somehow, even now. 2026, even now. In fact, in Khwabga, a man is marked as the man who spoke English. That becomes the identifier. So it is still true in India now. So one might say that somehow Indian literature in English has become a part of it and has also failed to breach this divide between the elite, sarkar, and the public. So please don't accept me or accept whatever I say. I ask you only to think about this. Now, if one is to look for reasons, the most obvious answer would be class. I go back to Sartre. I mean, I speak about class and I immediately jump to Sartre. There is an irony here. In one of his interviews, it's called The Writer and His Language, he talks about this idea which we also use, but I was quite happy to find it in Sartre, the idea of resonance. That it is the element that resonates with the reader and makes him identify with certain aspects of the text. In the case of Indian writings in English, the readers, being cultural elites, will have resonance with themes that may not be the central focus of the text. They may connect with ambitions, repercussions, instead of looking at class issues, simply because they have a different perception of those, or perception towards those very issues, inhabiting a space that is beyond the scope of the atrocities referred to. Because this is once again the fashion that all these texts refer to some atrocity or the other. It has become a general norm in the celebrated books. Now, the authors themselves may have theoretical connections with the issues, themselves belonging to a structure that insulates them from certain realities. That does not mean that they are unqualified to write about this. That does not mean that. I mean, when somebody is writing about the Nakshal movement, you don't have to be a Nakshal to write about the Nakshal movement. It can be an academic approach, a critical approach as well, but the popular approach, that is my concern. I mean, they can. And as a matter of fact, their perspectives are necessary as they connect to those who are power adjacent. For instance, a marginal voice may not have complete command over the English language, the perceived correct English language, I mean, as per grammar books, those Renan Martin books we used to, or P.K. Deshwarkar for that matter. So, and that language may alienate certain sections who have better ownership of the post-colonial space. So I read a book, I see the English is so bad. And I will not be able to connect to that book because I kind of have this ownership of English for whatever reason. And then again, somebody else who is reading that book, their grasp might be quite faulty. They might identify with the flawed language, but they might find resonance with the issues that are there. They might find more of a connection with the faulty language as well. So this particular demographic will have the resonance with injustice and violence and will not be limited by the nitty-gritties of grammar. It is quite worth looking statistically at the audience that the Indian writing English caters to and how it affects them. Global recognition or exposure is vital, right? Even for the survival of margins, it's vital, right? But global recognition is also used to get authorial glory, which is very true. The other reason behind this divide, if not alienation, is the idea of the social critics and the ideologies that run behind them. Criticism in itself is not a problem. But the problem lies in attitude, in condemnation, and in a general lack of familiarity with what is known as the soil, that desh ki mitti kind of a thing. So, once again, Sartre, right? This is an interview titled Revolution and the Intellectual. Sartre is writing about talking about radicalism, and he is writing, but radicalism can lead us into certain dangers. One of those dangers is leftism, that is, demanding the universal immediately and instantaneously with all the practical, theoretical, and in fact, very often symbolic and imaginary consequences which this kind of voluntarism implies. So this instant redressal. In fact, in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, there is this section in which Arundhati Rai is talking about a certain very old ex-soldier activist who is sitting in Delhi and fasting for something, and how a whole generation of activists who are more fashionable activists than anything else, they flock and they come and they want immediate redressal, which actually speaks of a kind of non-understanding of that desh ki mitti that we are talking about. Now, this idea of leftism is not to be confused with the authentic ideology of the left. That's a very different thing. Leftism is this quick ism that is very popular. It is something that comes from a filtered and non-detailed understanding of core political thought that comes from a lack of engagement at the ground level. The inherent issue here is of that immediacy that implies an impatience for change, which in turn signifies a lack of understanding of the existing structure and its relationship with the individual deemed to be suffering. Because we are imposing voices on the people, that we are telling them, you are suffering. The person who is suffering is not allowed to speak. Right. So that also is a problem. Then, one cannot be free of ideology, of course, which will always dominate the discourse and the equation of literary reception. But the literary artifacts that have been well received globally and critically seem to have their own dynamic. The literary market is very much in favor of anti-establishment sentiments that reflect violences past and present. There is a fine balance between conflicting ideologies when it comes to the politics of reception. The spectrum ranging from overt criticism to shameless propaganda rarely sees literary texts or canonical understandings that find proper objectivity. Judgment of one kind or the other work better than balanced outlooks, because this judgmentality sells. Right. The question of history then, once again, and our response to it is more crucial than ever. The transition from the post-colonial to the neo-colonial has seen many projects related to history, and they have created this kind of irreverence for history in the minds of the common people. We don't really care about history, we care about the narratives that are generated every day somehow or the other. These neo-colonial narratives, even now with multiple wars going on all around the globe, we have been exposed to so many narratives. Modified perceptions have been created in order to reinvent the other or the enemy. One of my favorite essays is Umberto Eco's Inventing the Enemy. So if you have a chance, read that essay. It tells us a lot about ourselves, particularly in India with our close neighbors. So therefore, news stories, especially through media and of course social media, of internal colonization rather easily capture the popular imagination. But is that why the presence of post-colonial violence of a colonial nature failed to resonate with a section of the readers? Are we suffering from a look back in anger kind of a phenomenon that affects only those who have the luxury to look back? And that is once again another kind of elitism which allows us to look back and luxuriate in past issues, etc. I mean, when we are talking about Hungry Tide, we are talking about Morid Jhapi. How many of those people who are non-academic would actually care about Morid Jhapi? We would. We have been very impressed. We have been very, we have been taken, rather, been taken with this idea. My favorite novel, The Lowland, it's talking about the Nakshal movement. Once again, the Nakshal movement is something I think the average Bengali people are sick and tired of. I mean, now we are more engaged with urban Nakshals and stuff, right? So that kind of Nakshalism, once again, from an academic point of view, we have a lot to say, we have a lot to think about. But is the popular imagination still fascinated with that? So when that Lowland is engaging with this, who is the implied reader? So this is a question that we must ask. But as in Khwabga, and I always keep on joking about Chetan Bhagat in my classes, but in this one, I am going back to him. I mean, 3 mistakes of my life, and he is talking about Godhra. And Godhra is something people are actually thinking about. Godhra is very much there in the political narrative of our day. So these ideas, for a large part of the population, Morijhapi and Nakshalites mean nothing. And of course, Morijhapi, Nakshalites, I'm talking about Bengal. To the rest of India, do they have any meaning? Would any average Indian care for these ideas? But Godhra somehow becomes very significant. We know why. So, but these average readers, they are more concerned with their day-to-day violations and violences. This currency in popular politics becomes a pivotal point in reception and in popular culture. Taking advantage of this lack of interest in the past history, almost all contemporary political strategies aim at colonizing history. The project of reconfiguring the past and reinventing enemies, along with the distrust of multi-ethnicism, find challenges in many texts written in English. That is true. And that is necessary. That is why this Indian English literature is absolutely necessary. I am not challenging its existence. I am just looking at its reception. So even when we connect with, I mean, the brazen and the audacious way this is done now, so there has to be a construct which will challenge it. So even when we connect with these events, are we aestheticizing these atrocities somehow? This is the other question that I have. Are we creating a space in which an objective and distant point of view can have an academic interest in these events? So, like when we read 100 Years of Solitude or Love in the Time of Cholera, we are fascinated with the chaos, unrest, etc. Do we care about them? We care about magic realism. We don't care about the violence. Right. So is Indian writing in English doing the same thing for a global audience? They are looking at the literature, they are looking at the language, they are looking at the aesthetics of it, but not really caring about us. So this is a question that has been bothering me for a while. So the global market is absolutely fine with such a thing, because the hardcore real is always acceptable than the feel good. So what are we presenting as the hardcore real? Are we marketing these atrocities? So this is the question that I have. Now coming back to the idea of darkness, the dismissive approach towards the entire zone can be alienating to the inhabitants of the zone and to those who are struggling and fighting in it. There are people who are actually fighting the darkness. And you become a famous writer, you win a Booker Prize, and you say this is darkness, and you dismiss it completely. Right. So it's a book, it's literature. I don't have to be so judgmental about it. Generally, I am not. But the question has to be there. The question must be asked is, how do we locate that now? Do we keep it as a continuation of the older tradition, Toru Datta, R.K. Narayan, etc., or do we need to redefine the entire thing? Once again, as Professor Dalal had said, that idea of authenticity and identity, that becomes a very important part. I mean, if you think about that, there is a lot of literature coming out of Northeast, which is in English. But there are a lot of marginalized people who are writing marginalized literature. that literature itself is marginalized because they are not writing in English. I mean, Shipradi has done a wonderful thing with the translation. Wonderful translation, and congratulations once again. I could not. So that is a kind of thing, but they cannot write in English. So the India that is being represented, which India? Because we have many Indias. Which India is being represented here? So violence is a part of all identities. As a matter of fact, as far as Indian identity is concerned, violence has always remained an integral part. But the question here is, how is this violence being packaged? The representation of violence inward and outward, are they the same? The issue that has remained is of perspective. It is still dominated by the so-called upper class, educated percentage of Indians. One may go on to ask if it is also a rather urban upper class response to the violence that we are finding in that Indian literature in English. Now, this discussion does not question the writer who chooses to write in English, not at all, with all due respect to them. English in a space like India allows multiculturalism to flourish. Let me go back to Amartya Sen and his description of the modern multicultural individual. He asks whether an individual should be limited to a specific unchosen identity, determined by gender, economic classification, geolinguistic location, politics and traditions. Or he asks, should the alternative be like, or should, I quote, or should they be understood as persons with many affiliations and associations and priorities over which they must themselves choose, taking the responsibility that comes from reasoned choice. Now, this choice, this is what I'm asking once again in Indian literature in English, the celebrated Indian literature in English. What is this choice? Which location are we inhabiting? Now, the creative choice of writing in English is individual. The reception of that whole is a wholly different inquiry. This question must be asked, this reception must be scrutinized closely. This correlation between Indian literature in English and India/Bharat still tells us much about the evolution of our entire demographic in the journey of our colonial to post-colonial to neo-colonial space. One must also remember that this journey is different as far as the different segments of the nation are concerned. There are many Indias and each has a different degree of progression. It is difficult for any single literature to represent them all, true. And it is necessary to locate Indian English literature properly. The more canonized texts of Indian English literature speak from a rather urbane stance, if I may be so judgmental. While they are vital, fighting the entire ecosystem dedicated to the exploitation of difference and segregation and the unleashing of mob/popular responses, their effectiveness across the board remains somewhat questionable. The percentage of people reading serious English literature cannot be equal to the large number of Indian population which is enamored with our Ramayana and Mahabharata and etc. All our epics, all our religions, all our religious teaching texts. With tradition that settles them into the greatest comfort of all, the negation of thinking. With projects going against the spreading of the language of the masters and projects insisting that these new linguistic hegemonies be established, it is a critical juncture for Indian English literature and its stakeholders. One must also remember the Amish phenomenon. One may disregard it as, quote unquote, not good literature, but one must not forget the resonance that it has created. This resonance should define Indian literature in English. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siddhartha. That was a very thought-provoking and a very interesting lecture, and I was busy taking notes as you were talking. I was especially struck by the tone of wariness in Siddhartha's voice when he was talking about Indian English writing. So he has, as it were, turned the searchlight onto us. What Indian English are we teaching? Is this Indian English, Or is this too English? Do we really, when we lump together a number of books by diaspora writers, by Indian writers, by Indian popular writers, by Indian academic writers like Amitabh Ghosh, as he said, are we really talking of the same kind of audience or even the same kind of context? I found it a fascinating lecture, so thank you very much. And also this shift that you spoke about how English changed. English was one thing in post-independence India. It has become another thing in globalized India. What is this ideology that we now package in English? And he has laid bare to us the range through which literatures and language work, not only just as commodities which we buy on the market, from the market, but also as books which play a role in colonizing history. So yes, thank you very much. The paper is now open to questions, comments, observations. Yes, Chandrabha.
Thank you, Shitato, for a fascinating paper. You ended your lecture saying that we need to situate Indian English in today's context. Now, and you also said that, as we all know, that there are many Indias and many kinds of Indian English literature. So how do we really give it a particular location to this Indian English? Because there will always be diverse locations, conflicting perhaps, overlapping. And literature, once again, no single text has the responsibility to discover this diverse India for us. Every text has its own target audience, it has a market dynamics, it has a publishing strategy, and all these are, very, very closely associated. So people who are and again, another thing, most of the popular, the well-known Indian English writers are diasporic writers. And I have a little bit of reservation because they do not have adequate knowledge of the ground realities of people's lives living in India. So, your comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As I said that I have merely shared my confusions, but I will try to expand that confusion more. So through this, well, going back to once again Professor Dalal, this authenticity that she was talking about, and I always ask that this focus, this commercial focus on certain authors, as if they are the be-all and end-all, as I said. There are no other voices anywhere. And whenever either Ghosh or Lahiri or Rai or anybody else, even second generations, Kiran Desai or somebody would be writing, we would become so happy and so celebratory, and most of them do not even belong to this Desh Ki Mitti thing that as you also mentioned. So they are writing from, I have no problem with their writing. They should write their writing, not at all. But my problem is with our celebration. That we are accepting somehow in the classrooms, in the seminars, in the literary meets, we are kind of turning them into prophets and activists, etc., who do not actually engage with the realities. But the people who do engage with the realities, of course, one text will not be able to, should not be able to, or should not even try to be able to do everything. But the focused areas, there are so many books there. We were talking about, we are all talking about NAB syllabus now. While talking about these syllabus formations, we create this kind of canon in which we cannot go beyond these texts, right? Kari is a book which we are looking at right now, but it's not an Indian text, right? It is a diasporic text. It comes from outside. So there is this blurring of lines that we, in order to have a global kind of an acceptance, presence, etc. Salman Rushdie. When was Salman Rushdie in India? But we start with Midnight's Children, just because he has written about India as a marker for Indian. But why? Right, right. He lives in New York. Right. This is the question that I'm trying to ask, that we have this, yes, and we do not have one single syllabus without them. If we include some obscure, I mean, if I think of even saying that let's have a text by Amish, I mean, obviously not. Absolutely not. But someone parallel, someone near, there are many texts which we have to find. And this is where Indian English, this is the consciousness that I'm, targeting. That let's shift the focus. Let's come back to, if we are talking about Indian English in literature, in Indian writing in English, then where is that India? Is that the globally imposed idea of India that we will respond to? Or should we look at ourselves? Should we allow ourselves to be colonized by that same global marketing, the globalization, liberalization marketing? Or should we raise a voice and create a new canon which will actually talk about Indian writings in English? So that is the main idea here. So, okay. Thank you.
Okay, fine. So thank you very much for your very thought-provoking paper. Actually, I beg to disagree with something that you have been saying. Well, as you may know, I'm from Italy. Recently, I have read a wonderful Italian novel by a writer who calls himself Wu Ming Wan. Actually, Wu Ming is the name of a collective of writers in Italy. They do not want to be called by their names. They never appear on the media because they believe that they don't like this market-oriented idea. However, they do exist as a collective of kind of anonymous people, right? So, well, this is a wonderful novel, and it's called, it's not been translated yet. I will let you know when it is, but the point is that the title is Gli uomini pesce, which means the fish men. So men who look like fish. They're kind of legendary figures, okay? And it is all connected with the Italian longest river, which is called Po. Well, the name is very short, but it's the longest river we have. So, however, when I was reading that novel, it was absolutely clear to me that there were a lot of influences of both the Hungry Tide and the Great Derangement on that particular novel. Now, should I say that it is not an Italian novel because possibly the author was not coming exactly from that particular region? We don't know anything about the author, you see? And certainly it was strongly influenced by Amitav Ghosh and possibly other writers whom I have not read. So I actually don't think so. The point is that there is a kind of international dialogue about literature. And India has a very prominent position in that international dialogue. Now, that does not mean that those books or those novels, that literature is actually written for Indian people living in India. But however, let me ask you something. How many Indians outside Bengal today would care to read Garebaire? Okay, so, I mean, it's not there the point, in my opinion. Obviously, there is a kind of elitism in these things. But that's written certainly from a Indian viewpoint in many ways. And let me say just one thing about Narayan. Now, I happen to write extensively on Narayan, so there are a few things that, few details. One of these is that he had more readers abroad than in India back in the 50s and 60s. It was only after The Guide was made into a film that he gathered a wider audience in India as well. So basically, he too was writing for an international market. He too was kind of commodifying, if you want, his Malgudi for an international audience. But I don't think there is nothing wrong in this. Basically, he has his own micro-history, and he uses his own micro-history in order to write fiction. The point for me is whether it is good fiction or not. And I think that in the case of Amitav Ghosh, in the case of Jhumpa Lahiri, especially her English stuff, the Italian stuff, I don't know. But anyway, the English books, The Lowland is a wonderful book. The Namesake is a wonderful book. Okay, so the point is whether this is good literature. It might be not so widely read in India, but it's still, you cannot call it non-Indian fiction. It has to be called Indian fiction in many ways. And if you really want to call it something, that is international fiction from India, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for your disagreement, because that is the point of these seminars that we talk about, and we have conflicting points of view. The issue here is, of course, they are all good literature. They're all Indian literature. I am not really questioning their Indianness. I'm not questioning their aesthetic value or anything. What my point is that because there are so many Indias, there is this also an international India. Right? And this whole project, I don't know whether this is true of European countries or American countries, this NRI phenomenon. Right? The non-residential Indians whom we kind of worship, because apparently they have the power to bring in a lot of money, which I'm sure they don't. But that whole idea, and in literature, these NRI Indian literatures are dominating. This whole presentation is aimed at challenging that dominance and giving some, at least academic, canonical priority to other texts that are there, which do not fall under that dominance, which somehow escape our scrutiny. So I am more about equality of all these, and not for once would I say that Jhumpa Lahiri writes badly. No, not at all. She is very Indian. And as, once again, I just caught Professor Dalal, so I'm really influenced by her thing as well. Somebody writing in Malaysia, so there is this question, some Indians want to be Kenyans because they're living in Kenya, but when they write, they will be Indians. So there is a hugely complex problem here, that what are you choosing? Of course, you can choose your identity, but if you choose to be in Kenyan, be Kenyan. Identity, well, you can shift, but not as per your convenience. But the point is that, yes, the India that is being represented, there is a large amount of India which is misrepresented. And I'm not saying that this because the Prime Minister is in town. So, right, there is this whole belt, several belts, which we kind of dismiss as backward, casteist, without really trying even to understand what they are about, what makes them click, how those dynamics function. So that is basically the point, but the disagreement is, I accept the disagreement. I accept your point, sir. So it is a valid point, and I will kind of, if I ever get a chance to revisit this, I will definitely think about this. So thank you.
One last question.
Well, the head of the department can ask me later. And Lucky also can ask me later, so. Lucky is my PhD scholar here, right?
Thank you, Siddhartha, for that thought-provoking paper. My question is out of sheer curiosity. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. Oh, hold it closer, yeah. Yeah, thank you for your thought-provoking paper. I mean, my question is from a position of sheer ignorance and curiosity. The argument that you're making, I mean, like I'm thinking of catchwords like the search for authenticity and misrepresentation and all that. I noticed that most of the examples and illustrations that you're giving were from novels. I wonder if this argument holds for other genres like drama, particularly, where there is more room for intersubjectivity and the dialogic nature, where you kind of give up claims of authority and all that. So how would you respond to that?
Thank you so much. Right. And let me tell you that curiosity and ignorance that you talk about, I shared that with you. So absolutely, this is an exploration into something new for me. And poetry is a very different kind of a dynamic altogether. This is something that I'll think about in greater detail now that you have mentioned it. But if we are talking about Indian English drama, then Karnad, Tendulkar, these are translations mainly. When we talk about somebody who is actually writing in English, we come to Dattani or some other people. But if you look at their theatres, they are also not visiting a kind of a larger demographic, but limiting themselves to a certain specific area, as theatre should. I mean, theatre cannot be pan-national or anything. I mean, in India, Utpal Datto's natoks cannot be, plays cannot be held everywhere. But in those individual texts and in that canon, that Indianness, I think, works better. But it is in the realm of novels that this problem became more apparent to me. Because that is why I did not go to theatre. Because theatre is so much local. Theatre is so very much engaged with immediate issues that even when we go back to Ibsen, we kind of look for issues that resonate with us. We don't just take any Ibsen play. We focus on some plays which will make sense here. So that is a kind of acculturation or something like that in those productions, in the things. So, but in case of novels, in case this kind of dominance seemed like a problem to me. But when I am expanding this, I will definitely visit this. Thank you. Maybe we can talk about this more later on. Right.
With that, we bring the session to an end. Thank you, Siddhartha. Thank you to the audience.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Professor Vishwas, for your thought-provoking lecture, and are sure that we'll get to listen to you more. And now, without further ado, we are going to move on to the third academic session for this conference. I'm going to announce the names of the paper presenters and the respected venues. Session 3A, Gender, Power and Social Formations. Chair, Dr. Shomok Mondol, Assistant Professor, West Bengal State University. Venue, Seminar Hall, Block A, second floor. The name of the paper presenters are Jahira Hussain, Pabon De, Dipannita Nath, Dr. Shubroto Bishwas. Session 3B, Colonial Alternatives and Post-Colonial Formations. Chair, Dr. Rafat Ali, Associate Professor, Jadavpur University. Venue, Boardroom, ground floor. The name of the paper presenters are Shornendu Ghosh, Raihan Akhtar, Session 3C, Heritage Architecture and Conservation Practices, Chair Dr. Priyanka Chakraborty, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of English, Sister Nivedita University. Venue Moot Court, third floor. The name of the paper presenters are Abhishek Bhattacharya, Dr. Shurabhi Jha, Mobhita Chaudhuri, Dr. Ritushri Sengupta. For the session 3C, the chair is Dr. Orchita Banerjee, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Sister Nivedita University. The participants are requested to go to their respective venues, and if you need any sort of help or assistance, our volunteers are there to help you. And after the end of this academic session, we'll gather here for lunch, and after that, we'll move on to the fourth plenary lecture of this conference. Thank you.